Hello, and thank you for joining us again for a deep dive. My name is John, and I have the pleasure of sitting across the table from Pastor Shawn Scarborough. He's the lead pastor of Family Worship Center here in Lakeland, Florida. Our goal for this conversation really is to hopefully start more conversations in your small groups, your relationships, and your everyday life about how to become a better disciple of Jesus. So today we're going to be taking some key points from Pastor Shawn's Sunday message, and we'll kind of expound on them a little bit more through this conversation. So we'll go ahead and jump on in. Welcome,
Great.
Pastor Shawn.
Yes.
Sunday, you introduced a topic that I'm really excited about. You started a new series on spiritual gifts. And I know it was more of an introduction, but I think there's a lot of takeaways and there's a lot of questions to be asked. So we'll jump on in. You talked about how God empowers every single believer and I think every single person with spiritual gifts. And I just wanted to ask, if every single person really has God-given gifts, why don't we always see those gifts in action, maybe in our neighbors and ourselves and other people that we're a part of the church with?
Yeah, for sure. So I think we do. I think it's just how we index them. So, we usually see something somebody does that is helpful, adds value, or that they're good at. And I think that is a giftedness that we are able to be aware of. And people wouldn't always consider that a gift, but if I can make someone feel good about their day, is that less of a gift than if I can throw a football? So I think we sometimes mix gifts and talents a little bit, maybe in the conversation, and hopefully as we go through this, we'll be able to sort of separate what is talent, what is gift. Yeah.
That kind of leads to my next question, because I was going to ask, is there a difference between natural gifts and spiritual gifts?
Yeah, huge. But I think that what we're more aware of are the natural gifts or the talents, and we miss the spiritual gift that's actually motivating the talent.
Gotcha.
And if we can go a little deeper in our own selves, I think we can find, let's find purpose to this talent that I have. What is this talent flowing out of? I think that's where the spiritual gift is.
For sure. So when I hear you say talents, maybe this is more of a talent, but like a good musician or a good communicator, like those are kind of obvious.
Yeah.
But like, how can we better discover? And obviously by coming and listening to this series, we'll better discover. But if we want to better cultivate maybe the gifts that God has given us that aren't as visible like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, I think it's the easiest to start with what is visible. Mm-hmm. What do I do that I enjoy doing that people receive value when I do it? Mm-hmm. So we'll just call that a talent. And then what is motivating that talent? Mm-hmm. And I think that's where we can start getting to what is the spiritual gift. Because for every spiritual gift, what we're going to try and sort of demonstrate is there are various talents that would flow out of that. In the same way that when 1 Corinthians 12 says there are a variety of gifts, there are multiple gifts, and then out of each of those gifts, there's so many expressions of that gift. And I think it's the expression that is the talent that we sometimes miss. Right. And like we're going to go through the Old Testament and really work through, I think sometimes we think that the Holy Spirit was only active in the New Testament.
For sure.
But then when we, jump back and see where craftsmen that put together the first tabernacle and built the furniture, it says the Spirit of the Lord came upon them, that he literally came upon them with craftsmanship. So we wouldn't, in the New Testament sometimes, I think, consider craftsmanship as a gift of the Spirit. But when you go deeper into the Word and it talks about that as a skillfulness, which is wisdom, now you use the word wisdom. I see that in the New Testament. So I think it's finding, it's demonstrating or presenting itself as craftsmanship, but what's the purpose? Where is the origin of that? And we get into this wisdom or skillfulness.
Right.
So that's what I hope we're able to do. Because I think if we can find the purpose to what we do, we'll be far more committed to this talent.
Definitely.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think just thinking about the concept of spiritual gifts, especially in our culture, it's easy to just assume that we come to church, the pastor has a spiritual gift, maybe some of the elders or some of the other people that are on staff, But in reality, every single person that's a believer in Jesus and has the Holy Spirit inside of them, you're saying that they have a spiritual gift to be used in the body.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that's huge because there's probably, maybe you agree with this or disagree, there's probably a lot of people in our church, but in the church as a whole across the world, that are currently not using any of their gifts.
For sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think part of that is because in the conversation, especially in the 1 Corinthians 12 listing, when it talks about wisdom, it literally specifies an utterance of wisdom. So we're not talking specifically about wisdom, but in this listing of spiritual gifts, it's an utterance. So that would be something that would come much more spontaneous. Mm-hmm. So like I'm sitting across from someone, and they just have a need that they don't have an answer for. They need wisdom. And the Spirit of God can come upon an individual to give a utterance of wisdom. And we want to just limit it to that. So I've never had that experience. Mm-hmm. You may not have had that experience, but you still very well could have the Spirit of God upon you with a gift of wisdom.
Right.
You just have never had an utterance of wisdom. Right. And so now that would push us more into the Romans 12 listing. So I think it's just a matter of being comfortable with some of the language and not maybe over-spiritualizing it. But at the same time, what I don't want to do is make this common enough, because if everybody has a gift, it has to be common enough that we can recognize that gift, but then not take away from some of those gifts that might be very spontaneous. Maybe I don't have wisdom, but I might have an utterance of wisdom. So that's, I'm discerning that differently than having a talent that's demonstrated through wisdom.
For sure.
So, I hope we're able to clarify all that.
It makes sense. I think about, even you kind of shared this story about the young artist, how he drew that picture when he was a kid, but it's the same gift that he had when he grew up. Yeah. And I think about even like teachers, they might see students that have potential. They see the gift in students, whether it would be music or art or, mathematics, whatever it is. And the students haven't developed or cultivated that gift yet. Yeah. They don't know themselves that it's in them, but the teachers are able to kind of bring it out of them, and then through coaching, through cultivation, they're able to grow in that gift. And I feel like in the same way, obviously this is what you're trying to do with this series, but there's a lot of people, maybe they already have that gift, but they didn't realize what it could be, and where it could lead them. Even the power of it, or through using it and developing it, what it could become. Yeah. And so I think that's awesome, because I think there's a lot of people that are going to be encouraged and hopefully will learn kind of the language of their gifting, so to speak.
Absolutely.
So that's awesome.
Yep.
So kind of along the same line, you discussed this idea that if there's a gift inside of us, which we know that there's gifts inside of us, then there is also a demand for us to use them. Yeah. There's actually a call for us to use our gifts. Yeah. I know that there was a season of my life where I specifically felt kind of a conviction that I was supposed to use some of my gifts more wherever they might be needed. And so, but I also realized that there's maybe people already using their gifts, serving faithfully in the local church, and they might be exhausted or tired. Mm-hmm. They feel like, oh gosh, the last thing I need is more spiritual gifts. I don't know. Right. So how do we find the balance between just letting our gifts lay dormant because we just don't want to get involved, or versus maybe overdoing it, overworking it, or maybe even operating in something that is kind of outside of our lane?
Yeah, I think this is where I probably would get the most pushback, because I could very well be wrong about this. This is literally just my opinion. Mm-hmm. And probably because it's based more on my experience. Sure. But I don't think we get exhausted or burn out when we're using our gift. Mm-hmm. I think we get exhausted and we burn out when we're not. And I think this happens in our relationships. One of the ways that it's fantastic for people to, in the dating phase, to really realize, is this person who I'm supposed to be with for the rest of my life? When I'm with them, if I'm with them more, do I want to be with them more? Or when I'm with them, do I need a break? Mm-hmm. And that's not to say that couples have to spend 24 hours a day together, but I don't think we should go on vacation and come back and just want to separate for the next week because, I've been with this person for, 24 hours a day for 7 days. We saw that with COVID, right? I mean, that was really hard on some people's relationships because they were just together a lot more. I think we might have made a bad choice there if that's our general demeanor. Yeah. We don't like to talk about it because there are a lot of people who've made not great choices in that realm. But in an effort to try and help somebody who hasn't made that choice yet, I think it's important that the person we're with doesn't exhaust us.
Yes.
In the same way. Let's talk about our giftedness, the work that we do. If I go home from work every day exhausted, I'm probably not in the middle of my sweet spot, my gift. Because when we're doing the thing we love to do, we actually receive energy from it. Mm-hmm. It motivates us.
Yeah.
And this is what I like about, these personality movements, Enneagrams or whatever. Myers-Briggs was one corporate used to use a long time ago. But when you use it to see who you are and help you better define yourself so that you can be more focused on your track, these things can be very helpful. When we use it as what I can't do or that's not my thing because I'm not a 5 with a 4 wing or whatever, that's where it just turns into a massive excuse. I don't think we burn out if we're using our gift.
Okay.
I think we want to use it more. Mm-hmm. I think we get a lot of joy out of it. And I don't think we burn out when we're using our gift.
That's interesting. So really, if there is because there is burnout, like that's a real thing. Yeah, like aside from gifting, there's this kind of but what what you're saying is the reason doesn't have to do with us using our gifts.
Yes.
Maybe there's other circumstances,
Absolutely.
Other things that we need to look at.
Yes.
It doesn't have to do with the fact that we're using our gift.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's probably a different issue, a deeper issue maybe that, whether it would be rhythm, rest, sin, who knows,
Well, teachers have a joy to instruct. And then when so many policies drive them to do things outside of teaching, they burn out. Not because they were teaching.
Right.
But because of all the things that were added. I think that happens for every single one of us. You might be a gifted communicator, so it puts you in a position to communicate a lot. But then you're required to go to parties. You're required to mingle. If you're an extremely introverted personality, your gig isn't meeting people and mingling. Like, that's exhausting to you. And so then people might think, I can't do this. Well, they're not saying they can't communicate. They're saying they can't do these things that we've lumped onto it. And so, yes, I think burnout can happen, but it's usually not because of your gift.
Right.
It's usually all the other stuff.
That I think you just explained it really well, and I think that helped me for sure to clarify kind of that makes sense. Cool. So towards the end of your message, you discussed the importance of being in the Spirit.
Yeah.
And maybe even this kind of ties into us not burning out as well. Yeah. You said it's an intentional place that we get in. And you encourage kind of 3 ways that we can do that, which is by getting in the Word, meditating on it, and letting it get in us.
Yep.
And then secondly, through worship, more specifically maybe praise, and then lastly, through prayer.
Yep.
These are all kind of foundational disciplines.
100%.
As Christians especially, they might be kind of casual to us, even cliche, like, read your Bible, pray, worship Jesus.
That was a kid's song, right?
Yeah,
read your Bible, pray every day, and you'll grow.
Yes.
I think I sang that when I was like 5.
So we hear these things often, but you're kind of describing them in a deeper level here.
Yeah.
You're referring to actually being in the Spirit. And so I was wondering if maybe you could share a personal example or two of how the Spirit and the power of God have manifested in your life through some of these practices, almost to kind of emphasize, like, these aren't just, simple disciplines that are casual, but it's actually, we're talking about being in the Spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think I don't think I would be exaggerating to say in worship, for instance, I experience that every single Sunday morning. Mm. Absolutely. Every single Wednesday night. When I'm in the gathering and the team is up there leading us in worship, that's a very focused moment for me on my Creator, on God, on my relationship with Jesus, like to just worship for who He is. And It's not a time where I'm praying or I'm asking for something or I'm focused on my issues. I just focus on him for that season. And it is without fail that every single week I will have where my demeanor, what I feel, and I hate using that word, and I'll flesh it out a little more in a minute, but where I just feel like, okay, the presence of God just came upon me. And in that moment, I know I've moved into the Spirit. And my worship in that moment, it just is more connecting to heaven than if I'm just outside of it singing a song. Like when I'm driving the car. I'm not saying you can't worship when you drive the car. But if I'm focused on the road and where I'm going, and in the background worship's playing, and I might sing along with it a little bit, the truth is that pattern is far more comparable to me just listening to music in the car because I like a song. It's not an intentional focus on worshiping God. And so when we think that singing is worship versus worship is worship, we can miss that. So yeah, I feel like I have that every time in the gathering. Honestly, it's a huge draw for me personally to be in community worshiping, because it just, in a worship space, I feel like I get in the Spirit. I'll use the word faster, but I feel like it's more regular for me in that Sunday morning and Wednesday evening experience. So that's a huge part of my week and my just rhythm, my spiritual rhythm. Then, if we talk about prayer, prayer would be something that I certainly experience that being in the Spirit when there's a corporate prayer meeting. But in a private way, I probably have that more often. My personal prayers would be very effective in getting into that place. Right. I don't think when I'm singing by myself, I get there. So prayer is more of a personal journey into the Spirit. And then, with the Word, it goes both ways. There are times I'm just studying. Like, as a preacher, it's part of what I do to study a lot. And I can go down rabbit holes, and like for every Sunday sermon, so let's say it's a 45-minute talk, there's probably 12 pages of notes that make the cut. But I probably throw away twice that many of just rabbit holes. That's interesting, and I'll just study it through, and it was just curious to me, and I never really got into a place, and I recognize, this is interesting, and I'll file it away, but it's not part of this message. And yet when I stay in that intentional place, and again, from a feeling, but in that place we might call in the Spirit, the study is more enlightening for what I'm supposed to communicate. So if I was going to translate that to somebody's day, I believe that when we hit a word in the gospel that is our daily bread, that is to be applied that day or to a situation that we are meditating on that day. It's not just to be studied and known. That's certainly a good part of our rhythm. But what is that daily bread? So, yeah, I would say I have those moments weekly. I think it's possible to have them daily. There are so many distractions. Some days I don't get there. You might just sit down with the Word, and, it's great. It's easy to preach it, that it's available every day. But, when you sit down and you're starting to read and the kids come in, or the doorbell rings, or the dog eats somebody's shoes.
I appreciate your honesty.
Right? Like, you don't get there.
Right.
But I love that there is always available. And there are those times when I know I didn't get there throughout the day, and everybody has gone to bed, and that's when I can just take a minute. And usually that's far more in prayer than it probably is in reading the Word. But I also know when I've gotten there more often in prayer and not in the Word, I feel full, but I don't always have direction. And so that's where I have to balance that and be more intentional in what I find from the Word.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. It's funny because when you were describing these experiences, I went to write down this word, and then you said it as I was writing it down. You said intentional focus.
Yeah.
And so it seems like the key I guess, ingredient into all three of these things is there has to be an intentional focus.
I believe that.
So whether it's reading the Word, whether it's worshiping God, whether it's praying, this idea of being in the Spirit, it doesn't come on accident. It's like there has to be an intentional focus, you know, and maybe that's different for everybody how they get there.
Yeah.
But it's not just strolling through life. Like there has to be an intentional focus in our day or in these moments.
Yeah.
To really be in the Spirit.
Yeah.
And
and I'm glad you said that it's different, because it is different for everybody. I know there's, you know, movements where people would suggest, the first thing you should do, get in the Word. I mean, I get that. I'm not a morning person. Like, I'm barely up on time to get to my first appointment of the day, if you will. First thing I need to do is get the kids dropped off to school. And I'm barely ambulatory. Like, I'm not up early in the Word and full of the Spirit and then get in the car with my kids. But I'm a night owl. So everybody's asleep, and then I have that time. So, yeah, you do. And some people don't have either or, but they have lunch. They have that space. And so, yeah, I think you have to find your natural rhythm, your personal rhythm. Are you a morning person, an evening person? Where do you have time in the day? And then you have to say, at this time or in these moments of my day, I commit to this.
Yeah.
Because we know if we just say I need to get in the Word more or I need to pray more, it's never going to happen. But if I say I'm going to get in the Word more tonight at 10:45 when everybody's gone to bed, there's just something in that. It'll become a habit.
Right.
Yeah.
That's good. That's awesome. I think these are really practical just tools that we can use and that all of us can grow in. I know I can for sure. Is there anything else you wanted to add to today's conversation?
Well, let me ask you something, because I would like to hear this, actually. So, obviously, you're a gifted worshiper. Did that start with you just enjoying the guitar, enjoying to sing, or where did that flow out of?
That's a great question. So, if you ask my mom, she'll tell you that when I was probably 5 or 6 years old on the toilet, I was singing songs to Jesus.
Wow.
So, yeah, man, I just from a really young age, I had this... just whatever it was I was raised in church.
Yeah.
So in that sense I was exposed to it. But even in my own, you know, like private life as a little kid, I would find myself singing songs to the Lord.
Yeah.
And then I do think that it was something that was cultivated. So then I would, you know, I started playing drums, started playing piano. And then through that whole process, I think started to really understand what worship really was. And so that's the thing. It was almost like, kind of like what you were saying. That was like my prayer it was easier for me as a kid to just sing to God.
Yeah.
But then as I got older, you kind of mentioned the Word gives you more direction.
Yeah.
And so as I got more disciplined into getting into the Word, I was able to kind of shape that gift to be more intentional in the way that, okay, this is what worship really is, and kind of form that. But yeah, just from a very young age, that it's one of those weird things that it's just like that's just what I did. It kind of came out of me, and so but yeah, I don't know if that answered your question or not. But.
No, it does. Yeah, I mean, I think it's if we can take that, like we're good at it from a Levitical standpoint. Worshipers and communicators, like the church, we can spot a worshiper, we can spot a communicator, but we don't always spot the evangelist.
Right.
We don't always spot the leader. We don't always, it's like the guy that he never met a stranger as a kid. I mean, the 5-year-old that was just working the nursery or his preschool or whatever. And today they're selling high margin items or low margin items, whatever. They're evangelistic. They're just great with finding somebody and convincing them of what they need in their life. Well, when that guy can recognize at 40 that giftedness is an exhortation that brings people to the kingdom, it's just a greater purpose to their to their talent.
I think it's easier, I don't know, it's easier for somebody to sit and see other people that maybe their gift is in front of people. It's in front of more people.
Sure.
So you just assume, well, that's a gift.
Yeah.
But, to honestly sit down and recognize that, hey, just because you're not leading worship from a platform, just because you're not preaching from a platform, or you don't have a big following on social media, doesn't mean that God doesn't have a very specific and powerful gift for you to use every single day. Sometimes maybe even more on a very intentional level than me from singing from the platform or you preaching. not minimizing that, but there's places that we can't get into.
Yeah, for sure.
To use those
Yes.
gifts.
Yeah.
That there's people that are just getting up every day doing what they do, but God has opened up a door for them to use their gift in a way that I could never use it, or that you could never use it.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think that is so important for people to realize that.
Absolutely. Awareness is huge. Awareness is huge.
Yeah.
Because I think people want to use their gifts. I think people they absolutely want to serve God. I don't think they're being lazy. I think it's just if we can create awareness, I think we can really make a difference.
Definitely.
For sure. Yep.
Awesome. Cool stuff. Well, thank you guys so much for listening today. I really liked the conversation today. Once again, our goal for this conversation is to just start more conversations. So whether it's in your small groups, your relationships, your day-to-day life, talk about these things and really just focus on becoming a better disciple of Jesus. So to listen to Pastor Shawn's Sunday messages, you can actually visit our website, fwclakeland.org, or subscribe on YouTube. You can follow us on social media, and if you want to get more connected to the ministry here, there's just a lot of ways you can do that. So thank you guys so much for listening today, and we will see you next time.